Hi, and welcome to Conversations with Chrissy. I'm so excited about today's episode. We're really going to take a step and look back at our MVA history and some of the great leaders that I've had the pleasure of knowing for many years, and give you an opportunity to learn a little bit about how we got where we are today from a premier customer service and a safety standpoint. These individuals have played such a critical role in that effort. Without any further time, I want to go ahead and introduce them to you and let them start sharing their story. First, we have Marshall Rickert, who was administrator from 1985 to 1995, right? And the longest serving modern day administrator, correct? So really exciting. And John Kuo sitting right next to me. And John was administrator from 2006 to 2014. And Ann Ferro to my right and served from 1997 to 2003. Glad to have you here, Ann.
Wonderful to be here.
And we have remotely joining us Milton Chaffee as well. So glad to have you, Milt. And you served as administrator from 2013 to 2015. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So I'd like to just first have you each tell a little bit about yourself and the time you served with the state and your time as administrator, just at a high level, and then we're going to get into some of the important areas that you worked on during that time. But Marshall, if we could start with you, tell us, a little bit about your time, how you came to be MVA administrator, and then what you've been up to since then.
Well, the first thing I have to say is I had no idea I was going to be motor vehicle administrator. I had a position at Maryland DOT. I was chief financial officer. I was in my dream job, and I got called into the secretary's office one day, and he said, we want you to go over to motor vehicle administration for 6 months and figure out what's wrong with it. That was the buzzword of the day back in the 80s. What in the world is wrong with MVA? So I left for 6 months and fell in love with the policy, fell in love with the people, fell in love with the customers, and stayed for 10 years.
6 months quickly became 10 years, so thanks so much. And you also served at the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, which we'll hear a little bit about later from Ann.
Yes.
So thank you for that. And what are you up to now?
Well, I don't like to say I'm fully retired. I think that I'm easing into that position slowly, but I am retired and still engaged.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for taking your time to be here today. So John, you have the misfortune or honor, I don't know which way, of having brought me into this organization, and I know I am personally very grateful for that, but I also know you've had a tremendous just state career before you even began, just similar to Marshall in that way. I wonder if you could just share a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, first let me just say it's my honor and privilege to be sitting here with such great former administrators and of course the current one. And yes, absolutely, it's been an honor working with you and as well as Mr. Chaffee, who's joined us by video conference. It's funny that you mentioned that. Just like Mr. Rickert said, I never dreamed about becoming motor vehicle administrator. I joined state service in 1982 and ultimately ended up in various state agencies and then ended up at MVA. I joined MVA in 1995. And as the former assistant director of then departmental services, okay. And now 2 years later, I actually left MVA, okay. I left state service altogether and went to the Anne Arundel County Board of Education, okay. During that short time frame, Mrs. Ferro became the administrator.
Can we do Marshall and Ann and John and Chrissy? I already feel old.
Oh, please don't, because I'm right there with you guys.
All right.
We fortunately, Administrator Ferro and I stayed in touch while I was at Anne Arundel County Board of Education, and an opportunity arose when she reorganized the agency. And lo and behold, I think it was 4 months later, I rejoined MVA and I became her director of administration. And obviously, from there, I actually had the opportunity to become the chief deputy administrator. Ultimately, I ran field operations for a little while, and then and then became the chief deputy administrator. And like Mr. Rickert in a story, one day, during the Governor Ehrlich's administration, I was invited out to lunch by the deputy secretary of transportation, and that was an election year. Okay, and the former administrator, who is not here with us today, had just left the organization, and I thought, because I was being invited out to lunch, and I've heard so many long stories about how bad it is to be invited out to lunch with a deputy secretary. I thought that was going to be my last day with the organization, but before I knew it, during the lunch hour, the deputy secretary actually asked if I would be interested and be able to take the helm of the MVA. And I said, well, let me talk to the boss, obviously the wife at home. And within less than 24 hours, I called the deputy secretary and secretary back and said, yes, it'd be on my honor. So the rest is history.
And we're all very grateful for that.
And of course, I had the opportunity, as you mentioned, to bring you aboard the MVA when I became administrator. And I think that was a true honor for me to have you join the team, because you have been such a great asset, and you continue to be a great asset to the state and the transportation. So,
well, thank you so much, John. It's been my pleasure to work with you and with everybody here. Anne, why don't you talk a little bit about, I mentioned American Association Motor Vehicle Administrators, and you're currently the CEO and president, but getting ready maybe to join Marshall in the retirement world.
And John,
right?
and Marshall, John, and Milton make it look so good. I am planning to retire at the end of September from AMVA. Again, no acronyms, American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, where I've had the benefit of serving for 9 years. But really, I am in that role thanks to my time with the MVA. So back to Marshall Rickert's story, when I, at some point early in my career, I joined the Maryland General Assembly as committee staff. I was the committee staff, sort of like legal counsel, but financial counsel to the House Ways and Means Committee, specializing in transportation taxes, education, funding, all that stuff. And Marshall Rickert was the Maryland administrator, and he would come sweeping in with Bill Hellman, who was the Secretary of Transportation, kind of a dream team. I mean, they would come sweeping into the hearing room, and it was like, man, that is the coolest group. Missy Cassidy and Drew and Dale. I mean, it was just this really amazing group of people, and I was like, that is the coolest group. And when it came time for me to think about not managing process, but trying to gain experience managing people, I cast my net about and had the good fortune to get interviewed by Marshall and Deputy Administrator Bill Long. What a remarkable pair. And I remember Bill saying, I asked him about how challenging the role was. And he said, well, you start each day with the highest set of goals, and you do all what you can, and the end of the day, you just say, put it aside, I'm going to start again tomorrow, because there is a never-ending stream of challenges and excitement in the MVA. And so when Marshall called and offered me the job, I interviewed for Associate Administrator of Vehicle Services, and that was in '92. And that really shifted me from the legislative branch to the executive branch of government. When Marshall left, Ron Freeland became administrator, which was awesome. I actually had interviewed for the role as well, and interviewed with the secretary, I can't remember what. And a year later, Ron decided to move on to run Transportation Authority, I think. Right. And I had the benefit of interviewing again. Governor Glendenning said, why would I hire you? You seem to be part of the problem. It's just this common theme in the MVA world. There's always something. And I said, well, no, I'm part of the solution. We've got an awesome team there, and I'm part of the solution at the Maryland MVA. So anyway, I became administrator in '97, as you said, and had the benefit of serving for 7 years. I got the pink slip from Trenchcoat Man. Am I going too far? We had a change of administration. Trenchcoat Man was representing then Secretary of Appointments, Mr. Hogan. And I still have my letter being fired from the administration signed by Governor Hogan. It makes me very proud because I think he's an awesome governor. I know this is not political, but that being said, Governor Ehrlich changed his mind, and I got to stay under Secretary Flanagan for a good year before I went on to run a trade association in Maryland, the Trucking Association of Maryland Motor Truck. So I have more to talk about, and I won't. I just want to say that I had just a wonderful good fortune to come behind really on the heels of Marshall Rickert and Ron Freeland. And meet Milt Chaffee and get John Kuo back too at the same time. So it was a wonderful time to be part of the MVA team.
Well, that's a great segue, because I believe, Milt, that Ann was responsible for bringing you on board from the private sector. Isn't that right?
That is correct. And it's kind of a funny story. It's not really funny, but in September 2011, I had an interview scheduled with Ann that happened to be 9/11. And when I was getting ready, I was watching TV and I saw the plane crash because I was watching the news. And I called the office, and I remember talking to Annette, and I said, "You probably want to reschedule my appointment. I have an interview this morning." And they said, "Yes, we'll be back in touch with you." But the reason why I was coming to MVA was I said, I work 7 days a week in the private sector. At that time, I was the director of operations for the Mid-Atlantic division for KFC. And I just wanted to do something different. And I was really tired of the profit motive, because you were never better than your last quarter when it came to P&Ls and making profit in the private sector. So I said, I'm going to do something different. I'll be able to go home every day at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and I'm going to go see what the state has to offer. And I replied to it. Ad I saw in the paper. And after that, I interviewed a few times. I honestly love the people. And I came in the job, and it was never a 9 to 5, because I saw opportunities all along. I had the good fortune of really getting to know John well. And John kind of said, I'm going to be moving to do this. I went on to do field operations, ended up being his chief deputy, and from there went on to be administrator, which is a great story, because there was no one better to move into the chief deputy position other than Chrissy. And that's how I ended up moving on, because after I was moved to the MDTA, Chrissy took over as an administrator.
Pretty awesome.
So great to hear that history. And I just think it's important to mention that there are almost 30 years of experience as administrator, not just your state service, which in and of itself is remarkable, but as we all recognize, being administrator, it's not an easy job, right? You thought getting away from that 7 days a week, but it is a 7 day a week, sleepless night kind of job.
Right.
So I
just
just want to acknowledge the great service that has happened with each and every one of you, and really thank you for that. So let's start there, right? Marshall, and we'll kick it off with you, just talking about, the governor said we've got to fix, the secretary said we've got to fix MVA. It's a common theme that we're hearing. Talk a little bit about what things were like at that time, challenges, unfunded mandates. Give us a little perspective.
I put it this way. You needed 3 things to do your job. You needed a pencil, a piece of paper, and a card punch machine for first generation data entry. And that's the level of data support at MVA in 1985. Every piece of information had to be manually punched into a data card and transferred to data storage. And there was no business process automation nor anything like that. And MVA in Maryland was not unique. MVAs were the butt of everybody's comedy routine on TV and that sort of thing. The stereotype rude customer service experience, the stereotype long line, the paper, which wasn't a stereotype. We were just drowning in paper. What had complicated the environment in many of the MVAs across the country was there were a whole raft of unfunded federal and state mandates that got dropped on the Motor Vehicle Administration to implement. 2 that were particularly difficult for the state of Maryland was compulsory auto insurance enforcement, which literally required us to do a program of outreach to about 20% of the drivers every year to verify whether or not they had insurance. Each outreach was an intrusion to the customer, number one. And the second thing, it required multiple interactions with motor vehicles to perfect the experience. And the second one, which was even worse, was vehicle emissions testing. That was a federal mandate that got dumped on the states, and in many states with annual emission test requirements, it got dumped on motor vehicle administrators. Again, it was unfunded. There was no process in place. There were no business rules in place. There were tight federal deadlines that had no bearing whatsoever on reality. And we used to joke in our sob sessions as peer-to-peer and other motor vehicle administrators, we counted how many lost their jobs trying to implement emission testing because it was extremely unpopular and extremely intrusive and very, very difficult to justify. So that was the environment that I inherited, and most of my peers in the country inherited in 1985.
Wow.
And I can go from there later as to how we got started trying to overcome that situation.
So really a testament to your leadership that during those very challenging times, you had those 10 years of service as administrator, Marshall, and we're certainly grateful that you led the agency during that time. As I think about it, though, that Premier Customer Service has ribbons throughout each of you as administrators, and you put forward new initiatives, and really each of those are foundational blocks to where we are today. We wouldn't be where we are today as an organization without decisions that each and every one of you made that we've then taken and built upon as another layer, and it really has yielded such wonderful results, but it's thanks to decisions you made. So maybe if you can start off, Marshall, and just hit on what are a few things that you did to address those challenges from a customer service standpoint?
Well, the first thing was the challenge of approaching a job with no tools. And I had a few tools, I have to say. Number one, if you're the finance guy for the organization, you know where all the money is hidden. And some of the finance staff at MVA joked when I came from DOT, I came with a dowry, because I certainly knew where the resources were. But we had strong financial support and strong support from the leadership, both the secretary and the governor, to try to do something to improve a pretty bad state of affairs at the time. Interestingly, the first day I was in the office, I got a phone call, and it was from my counterpart in Washington, D.C. His name was Bob Thompson, and he was an early leader and an early innovator in many, many ways, both for the motor vehicle administrations, but also in AMVA. And Bob told me, he said, I'm going to just give you one word of advice. He said, think of these people who are coming in angry and upset, or however they are, as customers. And he said, try to instill in the staff that the people that they are interacting with every day are customers, and try to treat them the way you would like to be treated if you were a customer in some day-to-day activity that you go through. And that, of course, really was embodied trying to help change the culture of the organization. And we went a long way with that. We went through all of our training. We built up employee morale. We didn't have any money. We started recognition programs. At the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, I was in a leadership volunteer position. And one of the things we did was start an affiliate group for customer service. And their topics of discussion at all of the regional and annual conferences were ways that you can improve your service to the customer. That also was a great way to involve the private sector partners of MVA, because many of them had new and exciting customer facing applications and practices that they wanted to show us. So it brought about a lot of idea sharing, which we will certainly be expounding on more today.
And you helped establish the express offices and went to a 2-year registration renewal. These are really significant changes.
The most important things that I think we were able to accomplish basically was doing more with less. And we started a very, very directed program of reducing the number of times that customers had to interact with the Motor Vehicle Administration. The year I took office, vehicle registration for the entire Maryland fleet took place in 1 month.
That's right.
You can imagine 2.5 million customers, most of whom were coming in person to a rundown MVA office or to headquarters or a county treasurer's office, going through the hassle of waiting in hours-long lines and renewing registration. And just that example, we went 2 years later as part of our first generation automation of registration to staggering it every month of the year. So all of a sudden, your transaction volume on a monthly basis has been cut by 12. And imagine just the numbers impact that had. And then years later, we took vehicle registration and we went to biennial registration so that the customer only had to interface once every other year. The second thing that I really feel may have been helpful to my successors was we inherited the data center for the entire Maryland Department of Transportation. And we decentralized the process of managing data requirements and system development and that sort of thing out to the motor vehicle administrations, so that there wasn't one organization that was prioritizing a major state highway administration automation project with a motor vehicle project or an aviation project or such. And we also incorporated program management at the secretary's level over the major data processing programs and priorities. And then we migrated to an IBM platform, which at that time was essential because there were starting to be COTS products and programs, particularly early point of sale, that if you had an IBM-based background, you could take advantage of. So basically, I think what we tried to do was make the transaction experience as easy for the customer as we possibly could with the tools we had, and try to position MVA for the future, the very exciting future that I've had the pleasure of watching all of you move forward with motor vehicle administrations.
That's great. IT is so fundamental. So there's early decisions in terms of moving to the IBM mainframe and really set us up for success in terms of many years. But we continued to use it into our modernization just recently. So that's so important. And you followed after it. I know employee engagement was important to you as well as Marshall.
Well, yeah, before I get to that, I mean, it was so critical. You can hear how Marshall built on Bob Thompson's concept about the customer. And Marshall really was, he and Bob were novel in that space. That was not an automatic. I can't tell you how many people fought it saying, no, they're not customers. You know, they're citizens. They're not customers. It's just a whole different concept. But Marshall's work in that space is something that I had the opportunity to continue to build on. And frankly, it allowed us also to further open up the acknowledgement and recognition that employees of the MVA are so focused on service delivery and customers that to a person, all anybody really wants to do is be able to help people. And if we can continue to build on this concept of serving customers, and enabling employees to be helpful in every way they can. And if they can't get to a certain level on resolving a problem, have a supervisor who knows how to help them and support respectfully taking it to the next level. It's just this constant building of let's treat this as truly a professional, customer-focused, kind of employee-led delivery system. But I also want to highlight, Marshall, I think you also introduced the consolidated call center out in Western Maryland.
Yes. That's right.
So, I mean, there are just so many things we build on today that really came from Marshall's tenure in the organization. And one thing that happened during that time, when I was still with the Maryland General Assembly's committee staff, we used to have transportation funding bills every 7 years or so, 7 to 10 years. And included in the transportation funding bill, probably in 91 or 92, was funding for MVA. Every one of your fees is in regulation. Or in statute, I should say. Every one of your fees was in statute and impossible to change. And so there was a consolidation of fees into a cost recovery concept that has been hard to implement, but it enabled MVA to adjust fees once the dowry man left.
Well,
and the constant effort to say, how do we fund these things? How do we take advantage of this capital improvement concept and roadways, but take it into the technology and data space, which is where MVA resides, and turn it into a capital improvement of a system and a network so that MVA would also be eligible for capital improvement funds. And at the time, we were not for investment into our infrastructure. And our infrastructure, we always just say, it wasn't just bricks and mortars. Our future rests in technology. And you've got to be able to invest in it. So, of course, with a procurement genius like John, we were able to recruit him back. We were able to really take that and build on what Marshall started. I mean, it was just, it's just so exciting to talk about how we build on each other's work, and what Marshall created really led to where we are today in this space.
Well, one of the things I want to jump on, because Ann was deeply involved in this in her previous employment with the Maryland General Assembly, is once they see a fee or a tax or anything, the natural political reaction is, oh, good, how can I get some of that? And part of that fight was also ensuring that that money was dedicated. And it was dedicated to the Maryland Transportation Trust Fund. It was calculated in the fees other than the registration and titling fees were calculated to cover the costs of the Motor Vehicle Administration as part of the department budgeting process. So not only were we able to get that revenue base, but Ann had the fight with her customers, her elected delegates and senators, to make sure that that was earmarked.
Yeah, it was pretty great.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think, again, that acknowledgement that MVA is not a cash cow for the department. MVA is the front door to service for government. And that starts with all of our employees, right? I mean, Milt comes out of the customer service space. That's why we were so excited to be able to recruit Milt. We waited for him for several months, by the way. He said, I'd like to, but I can't come until next year. I said, I'm waiting for you. I'm waiting for you. Because it was September. I know
When I came on board, it was just natural for me to think about customers all the time. And even though I was in administrative services, the best time I had was riding with John, because he was in field operations. And I'd get to go out to the branch because I knew the best way to get the legislative people and the governor and everybody to be on our side was to make customers happy. And the quicker we could do that, the quicker we could show them improvement every time they came in, the better off we would be. So that was really my focus. And when I got an opportunity to be in charge of field operation, that's when I really got fired up. And we started measuring wait times more specifically and posting it. And, actually the service times each individual was doing with their customers, the average. That's when we started really making progress with the customers. Not to mention that bus that showed up.
I know, I was going to say, the bus, getting the bus over the mountain. It was pretty amazing. And again, just a little bit more in the employee space, Milt really our whole focus, to be sure, we're the employees who had the ultimate stake in how we did each day, had a fundamental and a foundational stake in how we did it and what we did. And so just that concept of employee engagement. I'm sure I didn't use the engagement term. Marshall just used it before when he said, and I'm still engaged in this community. But clearly, from the development of our homegrown strategic framework, remember we built our strategic plan? We turned that pyramid on its side and said, truly, AMVA is being, we are judged by who's in the front. And David Green led the effort. It was very much a homegrown effort to create our strategic plan, but that included ensuring that our employees had a professional growth path. Customer service representatives didn't always have a space to grow. And we have some very talented people who may be talented technically, but not necessarily from a management space. And so trying to create a double track, trying to improve pay, at least to be comparable within the Department of Transportation, just trying to acknowledge that role that as a community of employees, we were in this together. And I will just flag real quickly, one thing I meant to bring, but I didn't, I've got stacks of them. I've got a stack that I have saved, which are magazines that we created called Artistic License. I love the twist on word. We had an artist in-house, Nelson Taylor, who is a very talented artist. I mean, I've got some of his artwork as well at home, but that's kind of started. Then we had a group of employees that met as what's the speaking group that always, Toastmasters. And I sort of came to learn that we just have some really talented storytellers, poets, artists, and of course performers. And with Nelson Taylor's help and a number of other employees, we created a monthly or quarterly magazine with folks' poetry and work. Again, it just is a reflection of who we are, because we're people first. We're people first. We are workers second. And we just care about what we do. So anyway, it was just a sort of constant theme of building the strength of our team. And obviously Milt and John and you all carried it. And I just built it because everybody loved Marshall when he walked through. And I thought we got to keep this, each person's respect for each other and for our customers mattering to how we do our work. So
definitely. I have to say, I learned so much from those car rides that Milt mentioned. Once I came on board and was fortunate enough to sit there and just hear the experiences and what had happened before. And really, I feel like it was not only a lesson in history, but a lesson in leadership and how to run an organization, whether you knew it or not, that you were preparing me for. John, talk about some of those hard decisions. I mean, Milt had that focus on the customer and accountability and looking at stats, which frankly, that wasn't a priority. It wasn't something the agencies focused on back then. And you made some tough decisions about how do we move things to alternative services during a challenging environment that you had to deal with. So talk about some of that.
No, that's a great question, Chrissy. And I think first let me just say, to the credit of former Administrator Ferro and former Administrator Rickert, they really did lay the foundational building blocks for this organization, both from the standpoint of process as well as information technology. And when we each assumed the role as administrator, we just needed to basically continue to build and evolve utilizing the latest technology that's available. Obviously, back in the 80s, technology was, very different than today, obviously. So when we took over, we wanted to deploy the latest technology. And well, one other thing that we did focus on, obviously, was the processes that we had to engage in. We've always preached, as all of us as former administrators and current administrator, we've always preached that we've got to maintain a constant balance of 3 S's, right? And you know what that is. Service, safety, and security. Okay, and to our customers and residents of this state, right? They could care less about the other 2 S's. They cared about service. Okay, one of the opportunities I have is, and I continue to do this to this day, is to guest lecture at University of Maryland College Park to an executive MVA group students. And one of the things I talk about is my former tenure at the MVA. And the first question I asked these group of students, MVA students, is what do you think the MVA does? Okay. And everyone's got to raise their hands. And I said, well, you should issue driver licenses, or you do vehicle registrations. Very good. Okay. What else do we do? Okay. Okay. The motor vehicle law book is over 1,200 pages long, probably longer now. Okay. We have to adhere and obviously enforce everything in that law book. And the MVA regulates and licenses all the dealerships in the state. Really? Okay, I wasn't aware of that. And we even licensed the salespeople that work for those dealerships, okay? So those students were just enlightened when we talk about those kind of things. What else do you think the MBA does, okay? Once one MBA student said, vehicle emissions, okay? Very good, okay? Okay, what else do we do, okay? Nobody in the class was aware that we also license and regulate the driving schools in the state, okay? And those are just kind of something, examples that, I can go on and talk about what we are required to do as a state mandate to issue driver licenses and register register vehicles in the state. And one thing's constant in the MBA business, and that is the population of the state continues to grow, okay? And resources are not. So we had to work and think smartly and think of smarter solutions to deliver this service to the growing population of the state. So with the foundation laid from former administrators, Ferro and Rickert, we just need to continue to evolve the technology that we had available at the time, that we were each at the helm. And we also decided to focus on processes, okay? As you know, each and every year, aside from federal mandates, unfunded federal mandates that we'll talk about a little later, Federal Real ID Act, there are various legislation that are initiated that imposes additional processes on the MVA. And you know this as well as all the other administrators in this room. We sometimes have to go down to the state legislature and voice our objections to those proposed legislation that imposes additional processes, because the service and that we have to deliver goes up against these processes that we have to implement, right? Every new requirement imposed on the MVA goes against that shorter customer service time that we have to deliver across the counter, okay? So that brings me to what we had to do. One of the things that we, under my tenure under Governor Martin O'Malley, we had to engage in a process called state stat meetings, monthly state stat meetings. And this is where basically all the heads of every state agency has a report down to Annapolis, in front of the governors in a state stat committee. Sometimes the governor's there himself, okay? And most of the time it's run by obviously the governor's state stat director. And you're lack of a better way of describing this, you're being grilled on making progress on a routine, regular, monthly basis. And if you're doing well, sometimes you get a reprieve and you get to go bi-monthly. Okay? For the MVA, as we all talked about here, it's all about customer service. And each and every governor all hear from their obviously constituency, and they're all concerned about the longer wait times, and we continue to want to work to shorten wait times. So at one particular state stat meeting, I believe you were there, and you were there too, Milt. I think the governor was present. And basically, said, why are you not making you've got online transactions available. You've got self-service kiosks. You've got mail-in renewals. You got IVR, interactive voice response phone systems available for vehicle registrations. Why aren't more people using it? Okay. And we looked at each other, and I muttered I think a kind of a beat around the bush type of response. Okay. It's hard to change customer behavior because our customers simply just like to, let's face it, when you receive your vehicle registration renewal notice or driver's license renewal notices, most customers kind of put it on the side. Oh, I got time, because we mail it 2 months ahead of time before the expiration. And by the time, they realize, it's only a few days left before expiration, I better walk into the MVA office, brick and mortar. Okay. Yeah. And that's what contributes to longer wait times at MVA branch offices.
Another thing that I always found to be a challenge to explain to an elected official, asking the question, why isn't everybody doing it? Right. You have to remind the elected official and everybody else, we are not all alike. And the customer base of the Motor Vehicle Administration is a complete cross-section of the population. Right. And in that population are automation adverse people, elderly people who are less inclined to seek new ways to do things. there's a very large population of unbanked people.
Right.
And unbanked people don't have the benefit of writing a check or accessing a computer to pay.
Right.
They are on a cash basis. And we have a large population of people who can't just put it aside till the next checkbook. They are putting it aside to deal with, as they're trying to deal with getting enough groceries.
Right.
So there is a structural, I don't want to use the word obstacle, but there's a structural challenge to as far as getting more people to take advantage of automation because of this base of people who for many different reasons simply can't take advantage of it.
Right.
I think that's a great entry because kiosks, which were implemented previously, became the vehicle through which you were able to get a policy change from the governor. You want to talk a little bit about that, John?
Absolutely. I think Marshall makes a great point because those were the considerations that we had to engage in before we changed our policies. Okay, and responding back to the governor during that state stat meeting, you know, when he asked the question, why can't you get more people moved over to these automated transactions instead of walking into a physical MVA branch office? And you know, we didn't have an immediate answer right there because we had to go back and then come back. We came back at the next state stat meeting, armed with the answer. We didn't need to change the law. We didn't need to even promulgate new regulations. It was just a simple, straightforward policy change. It was about changing customer behavior. Okay, and we looked at the fragment of the different population fragments that you mentioned, Marshall, regarding who can't utilize automated transactions, who doesn't have access to a computer, so on and so forth. And we found that, you know, the vast majority of our customers, at least 80%, have access. So why aren't 80% of our customers, you know, not walking into an MVA branch office? We had to change customer behavior by making it mandatory that you cannot get a physical product over the counter unless you utilize our automated systems. Okay, so that's when, you know, Chrissy, Milt, you know, you were both there. We made that decision. We reported to the governor, and the governor, on the spot during that state stat meeting, to go forward. You know, do what you need to do to get this implemented. So we came back, you know, obviously drew up the plans, and the rest is history. And I think today, you know, even in your vehicle registration renewal notices that you mail out, driver license renewal, if you can do it through these automated systems, online, by mail, by phone, so on and so forth, you know, you're not going to be able to get a physical product, you know, over the counter when you walk into the MVA branch office.
And the benefits yield today, to your point. And last year, our alternative service delivery percentage was 76%.
Absolutely.
76% of transactions were done through alternative means outside of that traditional customer agent and customer interaction. So that is the building blocks that we referenced earlier to where we are today.
Absolutely. And that continues to be something that you continue to focus on, obviously, in terms of driving more customers towards that automation. And then with the when we were running the MVA togetger, we also had to implement the Federal Real ID Act, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
We'll talk a little bit more about that going forward.
Let's stick with customer service. I mean, Milt brings such an experience from his private sector background.
One important thing was we were doing this without advertising dollars. One thing that I was used to in the private sector, if we wanted to change behavior or get people to really see something, we used to advertise the hell out of it, and we'd spend the money on television, radio, and now it would be social media, and we would get the word out and people would understand, and it would drive different behavior. We didn't have that.
And talk a little bit, Milt, about, we had that wait time numbers right online, right? That was something you all did from a transparency standpoint, which is great, but it also gave a lot of visibility. So I remember some of those inquiries directly from the governor. Why is XYZ branch office so high, right? So the numbers were great in that they were tooled, but also really made it quite visible to everybody.
Yeah, but it did give us a chance to show progress every state stat meeting. And that was the great thing about state stat. Even though the governor's staff would never admit it, I don't think until much later, that we had more stats and more information than any other agency in the state. and we had process.
Yeah, Milt, you make an excellent point because you might recall that we were actually the pilot agency for launching StateSat for Governor Martin O'Malley.
That's right.
Because we had the data, and they wanted to use us as an example that would be by using data-driven numbers, they could measure the progress of a state-level agencies like ourselves. You know, so.
So just for perspective, because I think it's important as we think about these transitions, we went back and looked at what are the wait time goals for fiscal year 2012. Just for reference, that was about as far back as we could find. The goal was 40 minutes. Now,
2012.
fiscal year 2012.
Really?
So we know that the goals often are set higher than, or lower than we're able to achieve. Our actual wait time achieved last fiscal year, which just ended obviously the end of June, was 7.5 minutes.
Amazing.
Wow.
And really the last 4 to 5 months, less than 6 minutes, right?
Fantastic.
As we refine Customer Connect and our new IT system, and the employees get even more proficient at that. So it's amazing. All of these decisions, all these choices, all these investments have led to where we are today. And so I just hope you're all really proud of that, because we couldn't do what we do today without that. That'll wrap up this Conversations with Chrissy. Please stay tuned for the continuation of the conversation on our next episode.